Hi, today we are joined by Renee. She is from Australia. I'm going to hand it over to Renee to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Renee. I'm actually originally from New Zealand, but I've been in Australia for, I don't know, thirty years or so. And I currently work in the family violence sector, but I previously worked in child protection for 13 years.
Right. And so during the those years, Renee, um, which roles did you uh were you in within child protection?
Yeah, so I started out in it's called investigations and response. So that's where, on the front line, going out investigating child abuse, and all that entails, such as, attending court, removing children if need be. So I was there for, I guess, a couple of years there. I then moved across to case management, where, you obviously manage cases long term. I've done a little bit in the adolescent team, working with young people and teenagers with high risk behaviours. What else did I do? I worked alongside the police in the SOCIC unit, which is the sexual abuse team. So I would sort of interview perpetrators, and that was very interesting. And then I moved across to the intake team. So that's sort of the forefront, the first sort of line. When someone makes a report to child protection, it comes into the intake team. And I worked there for a number of years, working my way up to team manager there. So, yes, I guess I kind of worked across every program.
Okay, yeah. So sounds like you've done it all.
Mm.
Um, and how did you find your way into child protection? What got you? Yeah.
Look, I came from quite a difficult upbringing myself. So I guess I always sort of had that in the back of my head that I'd like to help children that were in my position, when I was a child and be that voice, and be that protection support for them. But it was actually one day when I was watching, it was on the news, and it was about these two children that had passed away due to neglect. And I think that was sort of the light bulb moment for me, and just thought, this is what I want to do and this is what I want to get into. So from there, I started my journey of studying, and went to do a bachelor. I went to do a diploma, and then went on to do university to do my bachelor degree, and so on. And how I got into child protection was I actually did a student placement there. Um, and then at the end of that placement, they offered me a role.
And was that but that the studying and the job itself was all in Australia or started in New Zealand?
No, all in Australia. So
Yeah.
I became a citizen of Australia, and I went to university over here in Australia.
Okay. And you've left, so you have the benefit of talking about your experiences and also uh because you're not in the position right now, you could also we can also maybe even touch on some of the challenges that you've experienced and maybe a few more questions. So let's start with which I think we've heard. I don't think we've ever heard from anyone. I've done a lot of interviews. I've never heard anyone talk about their experience on the what is it, the SOC team?
Socket, yeah. So that's
Okay, tell us a little bit
yeah.
about that team.
Yeah, so that's basically you work alongside the police. So it's any reports that come in of a sexual abuse nature. Actually, they also work with physical as well. So if a child presents with an injury or there's been any form of sexual abuse, that then goes to the SOCIC team. So that's a specialised team within child protection that work with specifically with sexual abuse. Also working with registered sex offenders as well. So, but we've actually have a team that's based in the police, within the police, a certain police office, and you work alongside the police in that particular team. You're conducting interviews. They're called VARE interviews with children, about the offence or the alleged abuse, what's occurred. And yeah, police sort of take over the criminal side of it, and then child protection obviously take over the welfare side of it with the children.
in a new system, how come they differentiate between your regular and this team?
I guess because we've got all, it's we have separate teams for everything over here. So, you've got your youth team, which is the adolescent team working with strictly teenagers. You have a team that works with unborns, for instance. So if you're, pregnant, there's a team that deals with unborn reports. And I suppose with the soccer team and working solely in that area, there was just such a big demand for it. And I guess, it's quite sensitive in nature. Not everyone wants to work with that type of abuse, sexual abuse of children. It's quite difficult, confronting. So that's a very specialized unit. It's also obviously, you have to read some things that are very difficult to read, such as summary of charges, which are very detailed. So, not everyone's can has a, the thick skin to work with that.
So, so it's different in that the nature of the allegations and the investigations are the
Yeah.
what you're dealing with. However, the risk assessment and safety planning quite similar to any other case you'd work with?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so what happens is the reports obviously come in through the intake team, and then you decipher, you know, those sort of reports would be, you'd read over them, make an assessment, and then they'd be handed over to the socket team. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of the risk assessment, that all works the same. We do have there's a few different policies and procedures within the socket team, and I guess when you're interviewing, registered sex offenders, that's a different type of interview as opposed to interviewing parents on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Okay. So what in your experience, what is that difference? What yeah.
I guess you've got to be highly skilled and highly trained to interview to register sex offender, but we do have there's a template that you would follow and the sort of questions you would ask. But yeah, yes, as I said, it's because quite often, you will be groomed, try to be groomed yourself. They will attempt to groom you, and I guess it's about holding that, also not colluding with the perpetrator. That can be sometimes easy to do when they are grooming you. So it's about holding them accountable, and you're making sure they take responsibilities for their actions, and challenging them. I suppose it's a bit of a different interview.
Okay. And you're still dealing though with the perpetrators are always parents, correct? In your
Yes,
system?
yeah,
Okay. Okay, I wanted to make sure. So if it's not a parent, then it's police without child protection. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, got it. And what about the youth team? What was the specialty or the focus of that youth team you worked on?
Yeah, so the youth team is dealing with teenagers that are, you have to be quite high risk to I suppose, go over into that team. So that's dealing with teenagers that are engaging in high risk behaviors, such as there might be drug and alcohol, um, doing things that could potentially endanger their lives, example, involved in high speed racing, things like that. So if we get that, we generally will refer them over to the adolescent team. They have specialized programs that they would refer them out to, such as there's a program called Finding Solutions, which they are an intensive support program for youth, and it's it's particularly for those teenagers engaged in high risk behaviors, drug and alcohol. So I guess that's that specialized team, and we do often refer them over there because that takes up quite a lot of time, and having to do outreach visits with young people, and they're specialized in that as well.
Okay, so if someone's watching this and thinking, well, if my teenager goes out drinking, does that automatically go to child protection in Australia? So what differentiates the cases that make it to child protection
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, we get a lot of reports like that, a child's drinking, a child's not going to school. Every report that comes in is registered on the system. But, in terms of, I guess, a severity with these young people engaging in high risk, there has to be an accumulation of different types of variables. So it would be, drug and alcohol. Perhaps they're involved in, perpetrating violence as well. It has to be quite high risk in terms of, their safety being at risk for it to meet that threshold to be engaged with the adolescent team.
Okay. So I want to clarify and get some. So, for example, in Canada, where I'm at, it would come to child protection if there are worries that the parents are not behaving in the ways that would mitigate or help the youth, or I don't want to use the word in proper positive ways because what does that mean?
Mm.
But in ways that would be helpful. Is that same in Australia, or are you saying every case
Yes.
would come through?
Every case comes through. So
Every case comes through. Okay.
yeah, and we have to register them. So quite often we'll get cases that come through, we register them, but we'll do the background checks, such as school checks, might be maternal health care checks. So we do all those checks, and then quite often they'll be closed off without the parents even knowing that a report has come through. But if we do get a report where it says that the parents are not protecting the children, for example, there might be the parents engaging in drug use, and the children are quite young, that would generally warrant an investigation. So, but every report that comes through is registered, and you have to do work on it. So, but yeah, as I said, that's quite often parents are not even aware of that.
Okay, that's fascinating because that's different than it
Mm.
is here in Canada. So
Mm.
in your system, if a call comes through and on your end you deem it, the parents are being protective, again in quotes, they won't even know that a call was made, but it still gets registered on your system, logged in.
Hmm.
Oh
Yep.
wow.
Yep, every single call that comes through is registered. Their details are logged. Depending on if it's something very like the child's not attending school, we still will register that report. But quite often it will be closed. The details will be put on the system. What the report you need to provide a rationale as to why you're closing that.
Hmm.
But they do have a system that you follow where you have to complete certain checks. For example, if a child's 3 and under, you need to complete a maternal health care check. And sometimes you'll need to get endorsement for closure if they're 3 and under, because they're classified as high risk as well.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So 13 years is a long time.
Mm.
Long time. What was and maybe it was different in, well, let me ask you. Was it different in different roles, or you had a thematic, because I was what I wanted to ask you more specifically about some of the challenges or the difficulties of the job, and so you can answer it in whatever way you want. It's different because of different roles, or is thematically it's
Mm.
similar, so you answer in whatever way.
No, look, it's very different in each program. As I said, I started out in investigations and response, and I think that's where a lot of people start out, especially freshly coming out of university. They're kind of like, oh, this is what we want to do. There's a lot of burnout in that particular role. I think people have this idea of what child protection is, and then they get in there and it's a high overturn of staff because they just can't. It's quite confronting, and it's not what they thought it would be. So
So
I
Renee,
worked in.
what in your experience, what do they think it is? And maybe you're talking from experience, but you thought it was, and then
Mm.
you realize it wasn't. Can you give us some details?
I don't think people realize the severity of the work, how quite challenging it is. There's a lot of also paperwork and admin, and I think people get quite overwhelmed with that. It's very. I guess when I was in investigations and response, I got burnt out in the end, and the reason I changed programs and went over to another team is because being on the front line is it's quite difficult. You can be called out at 2 o'clock in the morning. Um, or you can be out all night sometimes and having to attend court the next day. And, I think it's a great place to start. But and as for people, having this, I think people just over here have this idea of, oh, I'm going to get in there and help the children. And I don't think they realize, as I said before, the work that really goes into it. And, the admin side of it is extremely overwhelming. Court documents, it's very full on over here. Keeping a record of everything, I don't think people take that into account.
So that's your intake, and it sounds like it's quite similar to the Canadian
Mm,
intake.
yeah,
So that's the capture all cases would go to the intake unless it's a sexual and severe physical abuse, correct?
yeah, that's right. And so I ended up that's where I spent most of my years in the intake team. I really enjoyed that role. It's very fast paced. So you get cases in, you really have to resolve them as quickly as you can. It's generally within 2 weeks. I really liked that fast pace. I worked very independently, and that's where I found my calling in that particular role. Working my way up to obviously team manager there, and even the role I'm in today is family violence, but it's an intake role as well. So I enjoy that. After working, sort of on the front line and all the other programs, I think for me personally, the intake team was where I found my place.
And so time frames, because I heard you say 2 weeks, and that's fast, that's quick. So
Yeah,
do you have do you
yeah.
have is that your actual time frame allotted for the initial investigation is 2 weeks, 14 days?
Yeah, ideally, you'd like to have
Wow.
everything sort of, yeah. I mean, look, so I mean, sorry, there's if an urgent case comes in,
Yeah, yeah.
you've got we've got a 2 day urgent, and then you
Okay.
have a 7 day. So if something highly urgent, like if a child comes in with injuries, they've gone to school with a black eye and said dad did it, that would be classified as a 2 day urgent, and you need to get it out immediately.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to
Yeah,
clarify. I'm going to clarify. I think I misled you in my
yeah,
question. So you're talking about time response times versus time frame to address the
yes,
entire case. So you have
yeah.
time frames, which are you have 20, you said 48 hours?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Yeah, but
Do you have, do
that's
you have like
classified
an
as
immediate?
urgent.
Do you have like an immediate, like same day, right now you got to go out?
Absolutely, absolutely. We put the 2 day time frame on it because I guess that's just for policies and procedures. But obviously, if there's a child that comes in with horrific injuries, you're getting out there straight away.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. But the policy or the standard for working the case in its entirety at intake, how long do workers have for that?
Generally 2 weeks. It doesn't always go that way.
Okay.
Sometimes it can go over that time, but we have these KPIs, and generally it's a 2 week turnaround. And so anything over that time, you've got managers looking at that and saying, okay, what's going on with this case? Why is it still open? How can we resolve it? And, that can be a little bit frustrating working within that process, especially when you're dealing with, I guess, children's lives. Sometimes it felt like a bit of a numbers game.
That's fast because here it's
Mm,
45 days, I believe. So
yeah, yeah,
14 is fast.
yeah,
I can understand the burnout right now. So
absolutely.
what are
Yeah.
caseloads like?
Sorry, what was that?
What are caseloads like? Give us a sense
Hor-
of caseloads.
horrific. So, you could be carrying anywhere up to 20 to 30 cases. Um, especially within the intake team, we had a system, the duty system. So it got to the point where the new model was everyone was on the phones every day taking reports all day. And you wouldn't have time to work your cases. And that to me was quite dangerous, I thought.
Screened your own cases.
Yeah, you won't have time. You don't have time to
Uh,
do follow-ups. You're constantly taking reports. So yeah, quite stressful. It's I think the system probably needs an overhaul over here, to be honest.
Okay. So you screened your own cases. You were on the phone the entire day. How many would
Hmm.
that roughly?
Roughly, you could take anywhere up to 7 reports a day. Sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on how busy it was. But that's roughly, yeah, you could take up to 6 to 7
About
cases a day.
Six, seven
reports, I should
re-
say. Yeah.
reports, and how many on
Yeah.
average would open?
Um, on average, this is a rough figure. Out of those seven, I would say maybe five, 4 to 5 of those would open.
So that's
Yeah.
high. That's
Yeah.
high. And how big are your team? So as a team manager, how many would be on your team?
When I was team managing, I had about six on my team.
Okay, kind of
Mm.
the same as here. So six on your
Yeah.
team. They're each
Yeah.
holding 20 to 30 cases.
Correct. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you find? You said that burnout was largely due to not fully understanding what you're stepping into, largely the paperwork. What else led to burnout?
Obviously, having a high number of cases, just sort of being expected to, I guess, work very systematically like a robot, not having time to, the stress level is so high within child protection because you don't have time to work any of your cases. Yet you have, management on your back about why isn't this done? Why isn't that done? But I look, it's just a case of being understaffed. Uh, yeah, so much work coming in, not being able to keep up with the work coming in. Yeah, which led to obviously a high overturn of staff. In my 13 years there, you just see people, it's like a revolving door, people coming in, people coming, going out. It was, yeah, it would be quite rare to see people stay longer than a year.
Okay, wow. That's
Mm,
that's a huge turnover rate.
yeah, absolutely. And then, and of course, new people coming in have to be trained. So there's a
Yeah.
period of time where they can't, they're sort of not on the floor until, a good month or two before they're trained.
Is this you again, if you don't have to say where exactly you are in Australia, is this throughout Australia? Common throughout?
No,
No, okay.
no. So there's a different system, different governments in each state. So each state works quite differently. I've heard that, our system is a very complex system and probably one of the hardest to work within Australia.
I see. Okay. So, yeah, because hearing the high turnover, the only other time I've heard of such a high turnover was when I interviewed someone from South Africa, a manager, and
Hmm.
she kind of similar but conditions, so horrid conditions of 300 cases per work.
Yeah, that's horrific. Yeah,
Yeah.
I look myself. After 13 years in child protection, I moved on because I it became too much for me, and I didn't necessarily feel valued as an employee. In the end, it felt like a numbers game. So that's why I moved on to another area, which I'm extremely happy where I am today. But yeah, it's certainly just sort of over the 13 years, I noticed a huge shift and change within child protection, and a lot of people unhappy in the workplace.
Wow. What is it that, from your experience, your own experiences in 13 years again, that's vast experience. What is it that the public doesn't understand about the work? What would you say to someone who's never done it? What is it that they don't understand about the job? Um,
Yeah.
that you
Look,
would
I
encourage
think,
them maybe to be a bit more empathic and have a little bit more sympathy to staff.
yeah, look, I think, like I said, people come into this, fresh out of uni, ready to save the world kind of mentality. And, I don't think they are prepared for, as I said, the level of work, the admin behind it, the burnout, but also, I guess there's a lot of red tape, policies and procedures going into court, fighting, removing children and fighting to keep them out of these abusive homes, only for the magistrate to send them back to those homes. I don't think that side of it is really sort of documented or well known. But I guess, any sort of worker coming into this field, especially over here, it's all about, you've got to have resilience, and you've got to, really look after yourself in terms of your well-being. Keeping work at work, not bringing it at home, which is quite difficult to do, especially when you're on high caseloads and thinking about, oh my gosh, is that child going to be okay overnight? But yeah, I suppose making sure I used to, so when I'd finish work, I would get to a certain set of traffic lights and be like, right, I need to switch off. No matter, what I had sort of waiting for me at work, I learned to switch off and then keep everything separate.
Yeah. Um, what and I tend to ask this question and curious in your area and jurisdiction and country, what are the misconceptions that float around your community about uh child protection itself or workers within child protection?
So it's child protection has a stigma. Definitely, if you call a parent or a family and you say you're from child protection, there's an immediate fear there. So I think people think that child protection are going to take your children away. Um, Very fearful. It's every time I have to speak to a family, it's like, no, well, actually, we're here to support you. We're here to help you. Do referrals out for support, but they don't understand that. They just think that they're there to remove children, break families up. So it has quite a negative connotation over here. Yeah, I think it's similar to the police. That's that level of authority. Being it's quite very fearful over here. No one likes child protection.
Okay, so kind of the same stigma throughout the world. They're going to take your child away.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And in the 13 years, um, which of the positions that you held would you say you enjoy the most, or the one that, yeah, you'd go back to if you had to?
Um, well, I really loved my role within the intake team. Um, but look, that's kind of a hard. I suppose I did like being on the front line as well and having that client contact. I kind of worked a little bit differently. I would go into people's homes and really get down on their level, like kind of trying to understand, what the situation was. I did tend to work a little bit, outside of the box. I had really good success rates with my family in terms and positive outcomes with them because I guess I just, I would relate to them and try and understand them and where they're coming from, see the bigger picture, ask those questions. So I guess the front line and having that client contact is something that I would have gone back would go back to.
And what would you say you missed the most about it?
I guess having positive outcomes for families, seeing you make a difference in a child's life, or um, working with a family that potentially have all these issues and seeing that the positive outcomes, linking them into such a parenting program, for instance, and but yeah, I think ideally making a child's life, keeping them safe, protecting them, that was so rewarding.
Hmm. And I'm curious, in your when you were at frontline at intake, what on average were the cases that you got the most of?
Definitely family violence. So I'm not too sure if you call it domestic violence where you are, but
Yeah, yeah.
family violence cases, and that's why the sector I'm in now, by far outweighed anything else.
Okay.
Predominantly family violence cases whether it be children being exposed to family violence between their parents, or whether it was, family violence being perpetrated physically within the home. Generally, it would be, males perpetrating violence against females. But yeah, that by far was probably about 80% to 90% of the work.
Fascinating. And can
Yeah.
you explain why, so some might wonder, well, if I'm arguing with my partner, why would they call child protection? What's none of their business? Can you explain why those cases get called in, or the ones that get called in, how do they differ from the ones that are not necessarily sorry, don't necessarily need to be called in? Can you give a sense of what's the threshold, or what is it that gets you involved?
Well, we've just basically had a big reform over here in terms of family violence and educating the police and other professionals. We now have a sharing scheme as well. So we have a family violence sharing scheme, which means you can share information between certain bodies such as schools, maternal health cares. So every report needs to get registered. So whether it's, we've had things as little as, parents arguing over, I guess, money, that still comes through to, because police are actually mandated to send reports to child protection. And where I work now in the family violence sector, they're mandated to send those reports over to child protection and to the family violence team where I am now. Um, so it could be something as little as just an argument, a normal, argument, disagreement between parents, to then, the higher end, obviously, which is, maybe the father's physically assaulted the mother and the children have directly intervened or been exposed. So those type of cases, we would then look at the pattern and history. We look up their family violence history. And if there is a big history there, and this is something that, the children have been exposed to over a number of years, obviously you look at cumulative harm. Um, and generally those cases, would be considered quite serious and would go over for an investigation. And it also depends on the children's ages. If they're babies or under 3, of course, that's assessed as being more vulnerable and high risk.
Okay, so you look at risk factors, but I'm curious. So, what is it that worries the system the most that they stay involved in those cases?
I guess it's different factors. So we look at, is there drug and alcohol involved? Has there been a long history of violence? We will also look at, is there a criminal history for the perpetrator? So yeah, there's all sorts of different factors. If you've got all of them in there, obviously that's deemed serious and that will proceed to an investigation. Yeah, if it's a one-off incident, quite often, we might just do some school checks, get someone to, some professional to monitor, keep, and if there is any further concerns, they then make a further report to child protection. So quite often those cases will be closed off without the parents even knowing that there was a report made.
Okay. So I'm trying. So it sounds like once again systems are fairly similar. So here in Canada, like you said, the mild argument or the the and neighbor heard dad yelling and called the police. Police show up. They're mandated to phone you guys, but you would not necessarily go out to
No.
investigate if this is the very first time you've never heard of this family. The kids are 15,
Mm.
14, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely correct. So yeah, we in that case we might just follow up with the children's school and say, hey, look, because we're able to share that information, say, look, this is the report we received. Can you please just check in with the children and monitor them? If you have any concerns, make a report to us, back to us. Yeah.
Okay, and I want to be clear here because this is where I think the systems differ. In Canada, well, you can't do that without letting the parents know. But
Oh,
you're saying in
okay.
your system you can. You can phone the
Yep.
school and close
Mm-hmm.
the case without letting parents know that a call was even made.
Yep, and that's been going
Wow.
on for quite some time. So we're able to do that. We can call any professional within the sharing scheme, and yeah, we don't have to get the parents' permission. Ideally, I mean, if you are working with a family, ideally you want to be able to share that information. You want to be transparent because you want to be able to build that rapport and that relationship with the family. So ideally you would have that conversation, but in cases where they're not proceeding further, yeah, you do that all the time without the parents' permission.
Or knowledge. And then
Yeah,
and you're saying you'd close the case without them even knowing there was a case to begin with.
yeah.
Did something happen? You said that's a new, not a new pop, but it's been policy that's been around for a while. What
Oh,
happened that changed it?
look, I no, look, I think that's actually been in place for as long as I can remember. I don't actually
Wow.
recall us having to get parents' permission for that. Look, sometimes we would send out a letter to the family and just say, look, a report was received. We deemed it, not necessary for a further investigation. If you're needing support, please contact the service. Sometimes, that may occur.
Interesting. Okay, so
Mm.
that's where they differ a bit. Um,
Mm.
so and you said when I asked you what you miss most about it, you said it's the helping families and so on, and you've moved on to family violence. So what are the to last 13 years, you must have significant resilience and strengths, and you've learned a lot. What did you take with you into this new role right now that you would say is super helpful? Um,
Hmm. Um, I suppose there's a lot of that's quite a difficult question because it's there's a lot of things that have been, helpful within the new role. And with the new role that I'm in now, I still work alongside child protection. I suppose working collaboratively has was something that I'll take away. Working alongside police, consulting with other professionals or team managers within child protection. It's that collaborative approach I have found to be most beneficial for families, and quite often will have the positive outcomes for families. So um, yeah, I think that's the big step that we've sort of taken over here, is working alongside schools and police or maternal child healthcare nurses, hospitals, other social workers, and sort of all being on the same page with respect to a particular family.
Okay, so
Yeah.
a multidisciplinary approach to.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what I'm sort of working in at the moment. So we all will sort of work together. You have a men's team, a child wellbeing team, and where I am as a victim survivors team, and we all work together. Yeah, it's great, a great approach.
And so if there's someone who's watching who wants to do this job and they've heard you say, hey, turnover is super high, statistically it's incredibly high and tough job, what advice would you give them to start it in the best of way and last as long as you have?
Yeah, okay. I think just to go into it with an open mind, and I would say, look, really just stick it out. Give it at least a year before you decide you're going to give up on it and, change careers or whatever it may be. Because I think initially going into this role is quite overwhelming and quite daunting, and people get in there and go, oh my gosh, I can't do this. But just to really, yeah, as I said, stick it out. Learn all those tools first before you decide you want to move on. Be prepared. I guess be prepared for. It's very confronting work. You're dealing with child abuse, so really having a support network around yourself as well. Looking out for your well-being, whether it's going to the gym or accessing counselling through your workplace, but making sure your well-being has got to be number one. Because if you're not feeling well within yourself, it's really hard to go out in there and try and do this work and help others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so and so right now, um, is there a question I didn't ask, or is there anything that else that you think would be important to say or explain about the system in Australia? Anything that you haven't said that you'd want to say?
Um, I don't think so. Look, I think no matter where you are within the world, and working in this type of role in child protection, it's going to be hard and confronting anywhere. I think, um, but there's a need for, I guess, I guess as I said, you got a lot of people that come fresh out of uni may not have a lot of life experience, and that's fine. Um, but I suppose just keeping the child, at the forefront of your mind, keeping that family at the forefront of your mind, because sometimes that gets lost within the system. It becomes a numbers game. Oh, I've got this many cases. I've got to close these cases. But just always sort of going back to why you're doing this, and keeping that child at the forefront of your mind. I suppose that's all I can sort of think of at this point in time. Yeah.
And last question, if you were kind of heading it all, what would one or two things you would change in the way the work is being done? Um,
Mm,
that if you
yeah.
and if that change happened, if sorry, and if that change happened, you would say, yeah, I'm going back right now. What would those changes be?
I think to be a bit more supportive of staff in terms of caseloads, having more time to actually work your cases, which means you're working with families, not at about not being such a numbers game, because that's ended up what it was about in the end. And I think, yeah, just more support for staff. Um, not having so many cases. Perhaps employing more people per team so that your caseload's not so high. And I guess just being acknowledged for the work that you do and being appreciated for the work you do. I think in the end, there didn't appear to be a lot of that going on. It was
Mm,
just sort of like you felt like a bit of a robot. You just got to get in there and do your work and, hurry, do this, do that. And there didn't ever appear to be sort of any acknowledgement. And I think, yeah, applauding the staff, showing recognition when it's due. Yeah, I think that would make a huge change.
okay. Thank you so much. You're the first one from Australia that we've
Oh, wow.
so
Great.
phenomenal. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, great to hear about what it's like to work in Australia. Well,
Oh, thank you very much.
actually, not all of Australia, the area that you're in, the province you,
Yes,
because you said
one
Australia,
particular state. Yeah.
they're quite different. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you very much.